same things.
Yeah.
Respond about
Yeah.
that.
Like, I just read Elizabeth's, and it's like, which I expected when I was filling it out. I was like, I'm thinking that we're all going to have the same ideas.
Yeah. But we might have, like, slightly different takes on it.
Right. And then we can deconstruct some stuff. Because I got confused a lot.
What were you confused about?
Let's see. I'm trying to look for stickies. Okay, so... And I couldn't tell if it was just because I have an older version of the book, but... Like, Corey and I were talking about how enculturation seems a lot like assimilation and enemy, the very last one.
Oh,
Enemy, or
I've never heard that. I've never seen that word before.
Me neither. But it was,
Enemy.
the way that I understood it was through the videos about the third culture kids and how they have, like, multiple different cultures. And, like, whether it was because, like, they came from a war-torn country, and so they have, like, that culture and then American culture, but then they also have, like, the culture of their, like, home, and I don't know, it's just, like, complicated. But it's basically, like, the idea that it's, like, this third culture that develops because of those changes happening.
Right.
Like, it's kind of like in the middle. Yeah. Like, the way that I related to it was kind of like when I came to college, like, my home is in Federal Way, but then I go to college in Bellingham, but then I also feel like college isn't, like, my permanent home,
Right.
and so because of that change, like, I feel like I have this own, like, floating culture of, like, wherever I go, I'm still gonna have, like, a specific kind of culture, but it's gonna be different from being in, like,
That's
that place. Yeah. And then enculturation is your initial socialization to the norms of your own culture. So, yeah, so enculturation, like within your own culture. And then acculturation is when an enculturated individual, so when basically someone from a different culture comes in to, like, the same space as somebody with a different culture from them. And then assimilation is when the people who are in that culture expect the enculturated people to completely assimilate to how they are. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, I just, like, I had to break down, I'm glad she listed those terms because it really helped me to, like, wrap my head around the chapter and, like, okay, this is what they're talking about specifically. So.
Yeah, I was just like, I was trying to, like, shorthand my definitions because I like short, quick definitions, and it just wasn't working for me this time around because they all sounded exactly the same to me.
Okay. That makes more sense.
They all have to do with culture, it's just, like, different types.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, like, my preconceived, like, of that word. Like, any way that I've heard that word used is, like,
Yeah.
Don't
bad
do it.
things.
Bad,
Yeah. And I like the idea, and I can't remember if it was, I think it was in the Django article, and they were talking about how we shouldn't focus on, like, essentializing culture.
Yeah, what do you...
Because,
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, what do you... Like, can you explain that more?
So, basically, how I understood it was, like, when you're essentializing culture, what you're doing is you're, like, you're almost, like, having this, like, different view of it from where you stand than someone who's a part of that culture does. Because, like, it's, like, looking at America from, like, the 1800s perspective of, like, what America was. Like, oh, everything is, or even 1900s, like, 1960s, like, America's segregated, and
That's
they don't
what,
believe in
from
blah,
the
blah, blah.
context, that's what I got, but it was described as essentializing and deterministic view.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I really, like, I think of the word essential.
Yeah.
And the word determined.
Yep.
And those seem that they have nothing to do with what this is
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
So that was hard. But once, like, the context of, like, talking about
Mhm.
the ways, the new ways that people may express their, like, cultural
Cultures.
identities, then that kind of makes sense.
And I super struggled with this one, and so I was reading both of yours, like, over and over, and I was like, how are they breaking it down? And it took me like 20, 30 minutes just to try and get that section. I only highlighted this junk. And like when I said it, I said when we essentialize cultures, we fail to acknowledge the cultural fluidities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Through the cultural connectedness.
Yeah.
So we like group them and we box them and say this is what you can be, and this is only what you can be. And then when we group students by our own understanding of what we think their culture is, and then by doing this, we often lack the understanding and knowledge of the culture, or have antiquated views of what the culture is like or can be, and then maybe only acknowledging the traditional aspects.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Oh gosh,
That's
it took me
what I thought.
forever to figure it out.
Yeah.
Basically, you're stereotyping.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I talked about.
Yeah, based off of like traditional notions of like people's cultures and things like that. Like that's like looking at Native American culture as like simply what like Lewis and Clark observed in their time, when in fact it has progressed like a lot more than that. And
I always look at things like this is bad because I trust people too easily.
Yeah.
And I just think everyone's like has a good place that they're coming from. So at first I'm like so I think of it as you think, okay, this culture has this common practice, so I'm gonna become engaged with this practice and understand it, and then I'm gonna be like, oh, you're from this culture? I know all about this. Like in the example where she was being polite.
Yeah.
She assumed take off your shoes, and it's like that turns out to not be polite, but it's like I don't think it's bad to come in with like the thoughts of like, okay, I want to try to familiarize myself.
Yeah.
You just have to be open to the to the changes.
And like always double check, like, do you do this?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so you know how you were just saying like essentialize, like how it's not really.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like, so essentially your culture is this. It's
Yeah.
like trying to box it and group it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a really good explanation.
Whew.
Those words really got me. Like
I know. I just had a hard time like breaking them down, and then when they started talking about like cultural fluidity, I was like, oh, okay, because they're talking about like the progression of cultures over time and how some things change and some don't. And like, one of the things that I liked was how they pointed out like popular media, like music and dance and things like that. And I thought that was a really good way of relating it because like those are some like very significant things that we relate with different cultures.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like a really good way of like thinking about that.
That definitely helps. And then that helps me answer the next part of the question, because it makes me think that we just have to stay like relevant to what our students, no matter what their culture is, like just because they're younger than us in itself, like we need to stay relevant to what they're interested in, and let them like show us. So like examples, like having them do assignments however they want. So like an assignment on a book report, like they can write a song or do a dance or draw a picture.
Instead of just like when you say like you're gonna like, when we did this all the time where you have to do a presentation and it was always like stand in the front of the classroom, present to the entire classroom. There's no other option,
I really liked the the examples that they gave of like the drawings and things like that students can do. Let's see.
Good luck with this page.
Yeah. No, I know. I also have the first edition, so it was
like $3 compared to like $100.
Yeah.
It was really cheap.
Wait, so like this, the figure 4.5 where they have like the illustrations and it's like talking about who they are and.
Yeah, those are cool.
But
yeah, that is like your flag, huh?
Flags.
Yeah, it was like a flag
And the
assignment.
other peoples, they did their little peoples.
Ooh, and then they added like words to it. Oh yeah. So the creative assignments, I was looking at those. I was like, if we had more time in our practicum, I would just teach all of these.
So I'm wondering, like, we have to take some time out of our practicum experience to, like, assess our students.
Yeah.
So when is that time supposed to come about? Like, we have 45 minutes for each person to teach.
It's outside of the
so
practicum.
that's when we go besides. So, like, when we go in for their classroom, we have to be like, yo, teacher, can I take her for a minute?
Well, actually, it's mostly, like, observational, I think,
Okay.
and also looking into their school records.
Because that's like, so informal assessments, right, is
Yeah.
like observations,
Mhm.
but the formal assessments where it's like, so, like, where do you live?
Yeah.
Which is funny why it's so much observation, because
Yeah.
we just read on which page that the teacher, that observed, and then he like led to stereotyping and assumptions
Yeah.
of the culture.
Yeah, no.
And so then so it's kind of funny that
That's why I think like having a real conversation is like
Yes.
one of the best things
Yeah.
to do, but I'm just not like seeing exactly when that will fit. into-
Yeah. An informal assessment isn't like the be all end all, because if you think about it, like the reason that this situation went wrong with Nishida and her teacher was because like you said, the teacher was making assumptions based off of their observations, but really like what we're doing is simply collecting evidence. We're not making judgments.
Right.
And I feel like that's the difference, because when you're just looking at how people relate to one another, or like the type of words that they use or things like that, but you're not making judgments about them, then it's easier to collect that evidence and just kind of look at it, and like, even though you kind of have to break down those like preconceived notions and everything, if you're just like looking at it based on your observations and not what you're thinking about it, then I feel like that gives you a better idea or understanding of the student. But
And a good way to check yourself on that is watch what verbs you're using.
yes,
Like, verbs are huge with
Mhm.
those kind of informal assessments. Like,
Mhm.
you don't want to hear should or ought
Yep.
or I
Yep.
think or
Mhm.
believe or any of that.
Mhm.
Like, you want it to be I saw this,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
heard this,
Yeah.
this happened. Like,
Mhm.
really, really concrete.
Mhm.
Like the stuff we talked about in SPED with whole messages. Like,
Mhm.
you want to start with that really concrete observation.
nice.
Yeah.
Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking of
Addition. Oh my gosh. Ugh. Yes. Okay.
Oh yeah, I was wondering just like what other kinds of specific examples did you guys give for avoiding
Oh.
essentializing?
So
I didn't get a chance to read everyone's super early, so.
I said, honestly, by just collecting information from your student themselves, because then you're not assuming anything about them based on the way they look or where they come from. Instead, you're looking at that individual and saying things like, oh, like, let's do a project, like one of the art projects that's in here. And then if you go around and they're like sharing in their groups or something, or if you're just talking to the student about it, then you have a chance to kind of like see that aspect.
Yeah.
But it's not like you're gonna go through the entire, like, one of the like formal assessments with them and just be like, how many siblings do you have? Like,
Yeah.
where is your country of origin? Like, what language do you prefer to use in this setting? You know, because the kid's just going to be like, what the heck is going on? And that's not like a natural environment, and it's not going to like build trust between the student and you. It's just going to be like, why do you need to know this about me, sort of thing. So I feel like just bringing it up naturally through those kind of assignments is a really good way of knowing, but also like it was talking about having conversations with the student and their parents, or like if they're working all day, then you find a way to like do a home visit if they're comfortable with that. But you have to have like a relationship built with the family first.
Yeah, and then like tuning into their schedule and their needs,
Exactly.
even if it's
Yep.
on the weekend.
Yep. Oh gosh. Oh, yesterday in class.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just not go there.
These teachers don't work
Do you
on the
have
weekends.
specific examples of like things that you would do in the class?
Um,
Because I still was kind of struggling with that. Like
Yeah.
I had like a book report example, but
That'd
I'm
be
trying to
fun.
think of specific activities.
So I took a different approach to it. I kind of talked about what you shouldn't do.
That works.
So like I talked about like when you're having discussions with a student and you're like learning about other cultures, and you're asking someone to share, like don't ask them to share for their whole culture. Like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like if you have an exchange student, don't be like, what do people in Japan eat?
Yeah.
Be like, what does your family eat?
Yeah.
Make sure that's still specific to them and be like, some people could eat something else.
That's a good.
And like,
I also talked to them.
yeah, and like not asking, what is your culture like?
Yeah.
What is your entire country like? Because countries, like, we know, our country is hugely different based on where you are.
Regions and
What state, what city you're in, which part of the city you're in.
What side of the state?
So asking someone to like generalize is like, especially
That's
about children.
unfair,
Yeah.
and it's also inaccurate, and that leads to stereotyping.
So that's kind of what I talked about.
Yeah.
That's a good.
Was like just watching your phrasing when having discussions.
Yeah, that makes me like question everywhere that I said cultural identities. It makes me want to say like individual identities.
Yeah. Because everyone's individual cultural identity is going to be different from other people. Because even if you think about the difference between you and your parents, like my parents grew up in a very different culture than I did.
Like we talked about Funcinella.
Yeah, exactly. Like my dad grew up in a like dirt poor, teeny tiny town in Idaho. Like he's from Wallace, Idaho, which is like in the middle of like nowhere in Idaho, and there were like several hundred people that lived there, and that was it. And so his culture versus my mom's culture, like she grew up in Kent, which is like entirely different from like Wallace, Idaho. But like they have very different childhood experiences, and like their upbringings were very different just based on that. So then they bring that to like my culture, and so it's just so complicated because everyone has this like mixture of different ideas and like identities and
like even Kent and Maple Valley are
exactly
yeah
no, it's true.
Like damn.
Yeah.
Oh my soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like professions even. Like my dad's parents were both educators, and his dad was like a principal for a really long time too. And then my mom's parents were both pharmacists. So it's just like totally different experience. And then like I can't even think of like comparing my family to other families and like how different those experiences are. It's like, but just realizing that I feel like is really important, because then you're looking at how not everyone, even if you appear to look the same or you are from the same area, does not mean that anything about like your culture.
Because like I bring it up every time, but my boyfriend grew up in China.
Yeah.
And so when he would go to school there for a year or 2 or 4, and then he'd come back here for a year, and then he'd go back over there.
He's almost like a third culture.
Yeah.
That sounds exactly.
And he
like
lived
that.
in Japan as well and China, and his parents are in Saudi Arabia. And so he comes here, and then like he'll get asked like, so what was growing up like? And he has to be like, well,
yeah.
So I didn't go to school here, and then people are like, where'd you go to school? And he's like, okay, well, and then he has to tell all that, and then they're like, oh, you speak Chinese? And he's like, no, I don't.
That sounds exactly like some of the people.
Yeah, that was really interesting to watch and like listen to all the different experiences.
Yeah. What did you guys say about like perpetuating assumptions? Because that's something hard for me. Like interrupting the ticker tape, it's like so in theory easy to do. And really, like, what do you do to not even like have those thoughts? I basically was like, I can't have negative assumptions if I don't have any assumptions at all.
Yeah.
Like, just have like a blank slate until you know something.
That's not how human beings
I
are.
know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like,
So
what
hard.
are we?
Yeah. I think that's why it says interrupt or disrupt
Right.
those assumptions, because it's not stopping those assumptions, it's questioning them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like saying, whoa, like I just thought that, why did I think that? You know, and like questioning what you think about people and how they relate to each other. Because like somebody might see me and be like, oh, like that person like must have like drank a lot of milk as a child.
I was gonna say that.
Like,
I was literally going to say that.
like because they're very tall and like all of this, and then like they must not have ever had coffee because like it didn't stunt their growth, and I'm just like, like yeah. So I don't know. But like that's just completely inaccurate, you know.
Yeah.
So I just feel like that was a really random example,
Yeah.
but, like, but also, you know, just like people have random thoughts like that. So
I think it's just important to keep an open mind, even if you maybe have, like the example, and like I said, how like she was coming from a good place,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And it's not, what matters isn't that she like had thoughts that were wrong, but she acted appropriately. What went wrong was that, I don't know, that she had those assumptions in the first place. I don't think that needs to be that bad of a thing. Like, I think that that's a natural, and like she's coming from a good place. And the thing that's important is that you can like check yourself on that and like, open up to like other ideas and realize that you were wrong and like learn from that. I think that that's what matters a little bit more. Or acting on it.
And like acknowledging, like I almost feel like you need like a T-chart in your head,
Yeah.
like a what I think column and what I know.
Yeah.
And, like, wait, am I filing what I think into my no column, or am I putting it on the right, like?
Or is it like somewhere in the middle? Like I think I know this, but I don't really like. I'm not sure about it.
So
And
what you said, like about the stopping versus the
Yeah.
questioning.
Yeah,
aspect
exactly.
of it.
Yeah. And I think that's where she went wrong, is because she didn't question
Yeah.
those things that she was assuming, and then she imposed her own
Right.
view or her
Right.
own cultural like beliefs based on like her personal culture.
Yeah. And we all have to recognize, like, we're gonna mess up sometimes. Like, stuff like that is gonna happen.
Oh yeah.
And so you also just have to be aware that when that happens, just be like, oh, hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I made an assumption here.
Yeah.
Allow me to correct that, please.
Yeah.
Explain to me your real situation.
Yeah.
Like, give me your side of
Yeah.
the story. And then, like, now I know better.
Yeah.
That's
and
really good.
And in Compass to Campus, Cindy always says, like, notice where you get defensive.
Yeah.
She says, and then stop. Like, if you get
Yep.
defensive, stop right
Yep.
there and think, why is this happening?
Mhm.
What's going on in my brain? What's happening?
Yeah. And I feel like that's such a great way to approach it, because then you're acknowledging that you've made a mistake, and that's such an important part of being a teacher, is like being open with your students about like you are a human being, you are going to make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as you do something about it. And like if you go and apologize to someone, like that's something that you're doing about that situation, and then you're looking for the correct response that like you should have given or you will give next time. And I feel like as a teacher also looking at that as not a mistake but like a learning experience.
That's what I was just
Yeah.
saying. Like everything is like, I need to learn from you, so like let me be open to whatever I'm gonna learn from you.
Kind of like on our reflections as well. You were telling me the other day, like one of the things was titled like, "What would you change?"
Yeah.
And you were like, "Well, I don't know if I'd want to change it because I learned from it."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then I got knocked down.
Mm-hmm.
That's just an entire situation. It's like, yeah, but I like that's how I look at practicum experiences now, because I used to like beat myself up all the time, like internally about like making a mistake, and then I just realized like, no, it's good that I did that, because now I won't make that mistake later, and it means that like now I understand this part of like my teaching that I need to work on or things like that. So.
So did we have any like additional things for like how we can find out about the school's cultural and environmental factors? The number 3 on there.
I didn't even like look at the. I mean, I looked at the book. I read that.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I would talk to the ELL specialist.
Yeah. Yep.
Use the like OSPI website to
Yes.
learn about demographics.
That's
This
pretty
was
much
good
what I did.
for in my book was the puzzle pictures.
Look into that community assets map.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It's like specifically you could do something like that, but also like just even talking to educators at the school and administrators and seeing, because like their opinions or their beliefs are going to largely impact how the school is run. And so I feel like that's also really important to look at, because if you have like, for some reason, if you have an administrator who is just like super against like bilingual classrooms or like therefore English only or something, then that's gonna have an effect on how you teach. And like, I guess you just have to be really sneaky about it, because like nobody wants to teach in English only classroom.
Have we come up with any questions? I just realized.
Oh.
I have at least least one for the next chunk.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, your original. Okay, no, we answered.
Yeah, we kind of worked through that one.
Yeah.
But I guess if we wanted to come up with one, there's always like for the disrupting.
Yeah.
Like, I almost wonder how we can like teach that too.
Oh.
Like, is it best by like modeling, or is it like it's kind of teaching critical thinking? Like it's
That's
so
a
hard
really
and
good
so
idea.
important.
That's a really good idea to teach that and not just like do it yourself.
Yeah.
Oh my
Let's
gosh,
extend
yeah.
this. Don't just interrupt your own assumptions.
Yeah.
Teach others how to do the same.
Yeah. What's our number on here?
Especially like if
Sorry,
you do that, it's all good. If you do that like early on, then you're teaching kids like not to make those assumptions about other people.
Oh, is there a password?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Hey, if you're tuning in just now, you should rewind a little bit. Joy.
There we go. Okay. We're at 26:14.
Yeah, how would we go about
Yeah.
teaching like that disrupting?
Like, I like that. Would it be more of like a modeling by behavior, or like, I don't know, how do you explicitly just
Yeah.
say?
I feel like you could model it because if you have a student that says something like that makes an assumption, you could be like, but why do you think that? Like, why do you think that? Like, from your experience, why is that true? Or what if it were this way and not that way? You know, like just being able to do that yourself and then teaching them how to do that, to like question themselves.
Through questioning, let them think about it
Yeah,
themselves.
I feel like that could be a way, but also like it would be hard to actually like teach, like to sit down and be like, we're gonna interrupt our assumptions about everyone because it's gonna be like, oh, okay, like I'll just sit down and do
And
a
then
30-minute
that would make
lesson.
students think about what they have
Yeah.
said about other people, and then that could get a little.
Although there are some like exercises, like I remember in my Asian American Cultural Studies class, the very first day, she was like, what do you see?
Yeah.
She was like, I want you to describe me, and I want you to like say things that you thought when you saw me. And so people would say like you're short, and like you're Asian, and it was just everything that came to their minds. Like, you're a bad driver. Like, all those stereotypes came out. Like, but it was, she was encouraging it, though, yeah.
Okay.
And it wasn't like those were their personal views. It was like the things that had been culturally like imposed upon them, like those biases. And so she was like,
ticker tape that
yeah,
you
exactly.
usually interrupt.
yeah. So she's like, look at all of this. Does any of this actually represent who I am as a person? And so like, it was a really good way of like,
That's so cool.
like having a concrete way of seeing all the things that like go on when we're looking at someone, and like being able to be like, oh my gosh, I did think about that. Or
So cool. And it's so important because I feel like even something like that can be like used in like young kids' classrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's important to learn at any age.
mm-hmm.
Because then they could be like, I remember when I was in second grade.
Yeah.
And we did this thing.
Yeah. I
Oh my
wish
gosh.
that I had been taught how to do that, because I remember also like being in middle school and high school and just like working myself into a frenzy, like in my thoughts, and just being like, oh my gosh, so this is gonna happen, and because I didn't do this homework assignment, like this is gonna happen, like all this stuff is gonna happen because I didn't do this one thing. And so if I had been able to interrupt that like thought process and be like, it's okay, like calm down, it's not the end of the world. And I don't know, just being able to have that skill in general is good, but also in regard to like assumptions about other people.
Sweet. And then I did have questions going into the video.
Yeah.
If we want to.
Oh, yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
feel like I don't remember. I watched it all, but besides the part that I answered about,
Yeah.
because it was kind of hard to understand.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to go in order or just add?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear what everyone's
Okay. So my question had to do with like involving parents and learning more about the students' home culture, and I thought it was actually really difficult to think about this in the context of the video,
Yeah.
because like the video was all about how the parents and the students had like this big separation, and it was like if you're trying to take on involving the parents, you're also trying to take on like getting them involved in their students and breaking those cultural boundaries. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about, so I kind of generalized it a bit more beyond the video, and I just talked about how you can have like family days where people are invited to come in and share if they want to about their work or their hobbies or their volunteer like positions. And then I also talked about how you can do projects where you invite the students to share as much as they're comfortable sharing about their home or where they're from or stuff that like family traditions and stuff like that. And just like different ways you can try to learn more about the families, and like you had mentioned, like do home visits if you have enough of a relationship with the family. Yeah, and it was just like I was also thinking about chapter 4 and what we were just talking about, like breaking those assumptions and trying to like how all of those activities would help students within your classroom like learn about each other and break their assumptions, like hearing people's personal stories and being like, oh, that's not what I thought your life would be like, but now I know better. So
I feel like that first part that you talked about could be tricky. Like if the way that their family or their culture like does things where parents and children don't really like have that close of relationship, and like they don't talk about school, and the kids, it's just not something, or like on a personal level maybe they talk about school, but not it's like how can you don't want to cross that barrier where you need to get the parents involved where they're not used to, but that's like essential to their students, to their child's learning.
That's always tricky.
it's like how much is the teacher's responsibility in that situation?
That would be a great money question.
So rephrase
Like,
that.
Yeah, we can reword that.
How can you involve parents who, I don't know, how do you cross the
Like reach out to parents who aren't traditionally or aren't
Culturally.
usually involved in their
I feel like
students'
traditionally
learning
is
or
a good
whatever.
way to say that.
30 on the dot. 30, 32.
32.
32 on the dot.
32.
Okay,
Sure.
sorry. 3200. So how can we reach out to parents?
Like who aren't traditionally involved in
Yeah.
their child's like school life
Or even like, oh, that's tricky because then that brings up the essentializing thing.
Yeah.
Because then you have like Americanized versions of like specific cultures, and like you have like
So maybe rephrase it
Oh,
again.
what if it's
Yeah.
like how do we like involve parents to like help them like or not even
how do
help
we
them.
make parents feel more comfortable with
Yeah.
getting involved in their students'
Yeah, and like how can we like
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I feel like that's one of those cultural things. Again, there was a story in this chapter about the student who was having a hard time getting their homework done because of like noise or something like that, and then the teacher automatically assumed like, oh, let's remove them from that situation because then like they won't get distracted, when in fact they came from a collectivist culture in which it would be actually better to have the family like helping them out with their homework, or like if they have cousins living with them, then they could have like homework time where they all get together and like talk about their homework and they can help each other. And like how the teachers took it was like, oh, we can have an after school program or something, but then like you're still not getting like the family aspect in there. So
Yeah.
because okay, so one of the schools I work at, the Compass campus, one of the teachers was like pulled out of the program because of reasons, but like he's very, very strict, and he's one of the old teachers that doesn't have to go and do testing every year because they just repeat that thing. And so like I'll see parents come to like have conferences with him, and he locks the door, like he won't let them come in until the school bells rang, and if the kids were misbehaving, they're still not allowed to leave until like he says they're allowed to leave. And if parents come in when he says they're not allowed to, he kicks them back out. He says, you're not welcome in this room right now.
whoa,
And it's so weird.
Ooh.
And like I've definitely chatted with the principal, but there's
Yeah.
not much
seriously.
we can do. But it's like the parents like don't feel comfortable
I
like
wouldn't.
coming and trying to be involved, and then they feel like there's a war between the parents and the teacher.
Oh, that's like the last thing you ever want.
Yeah, exactly. I bet the students aren't too happy either. I wouldn't be.
Yeah. How
In
awkward.
my AMST class that I'm in right now, we're talking about Latino culture in America, and we're watching this documentary about people from the Dominican Republic. And wait, is that the right country? I think that's the right country. People from somewhere. Anyways, my point's more about the teacher that they interact with. These teachers, it's like this high school girl who's having troubles because of like cultural differences and different like expectations based on homework. And her parents are trying to like help her succeed, but they don't know any English, and so the mom goes in to have these conferences with the teacher, and the teacher is just, this is what's wrong with your student. Your student
What's
has
wrong?
trouble
Deficits.
focusing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, just all this like, and it was like a high school student, so it was like all 6 teachers, all were just like deficit oriented, and her mom went home and was like crying, and then like yelled at her daughter to do her homework because she felt like her daughter was a failure in the eyes of the school. It was so sad.
That makes me
Horrible.
really
And I was-
sad.
It just like made me think about this class and like everything, and I'm like, that's what we're trying to fight. Like we're trying to like make sure that we're being like culturally respectful and like here's what your student is doing, here's where they might need help.
Yeah, and there was, I don't remember what page it was on, but it said like using cultural assets in the classroom.
Yeah.
Like,
Not looking at cultural differences as a problem or a deficit, but rather as like
how can we involve
positive
this in
thing,
the
yeah.
classroom?
Yeah,
This is great.
definitely.
Helpful. That makes my heart sad.
I know.
It was also a really old documentary though, so hopefully
Yeah.
this is something that's
Oh,
already
but
starting
I've
to
had
shift.
experiences with teachers in high school who, like, I never got that because I was, of course, like, the privileged white kid that, like, I always had my parents around to help me with my homework, and I never had problems with, like, academic stuff in school and stuff, but I would be there for other students, like, conferences, and it was ridiculous. It was, like, really ridiculous. And to see the difference between how they talk to my parents and me versus how they talk to other people
Oh,
was
geez.
terrible.
Disgusting.
It was awful. And I think about that, and I'm like, I thought they were a decent teacher, but now that I think about that, they were terrible. Like, if you can't cater to more than just like the privileged group, like, you're not a teacher. Like, that's not how it works.
Oh, do we want to talk about B too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, that's cool.
That's all good.
Mine was asking about. Oh my gosh. It was a situation which I watched like 5 times because I couldn't like really understand what he was saying, which helped me answer my question because it was like this kid got accused of being in a gang. A girl like decided to lie that he did something wrong. He got brought into the principal's office, and they were like, "So are you in a gang? Do you have a gun?" And it was like kind of out of nowhere, and then they just accused him, and it was just such a wrong situation. So it's like, how would you have handled the situation, and how could it have been handled better? And it's like, well, first of all, there was no communication like between the student before just accusing him, so that's obviously wrong. Like, and there was no communication with the parents because the parents don't speak English. And so it was like they didn't even try, and obviously that can be solved just get it, like using a translator, which they talked about in the video. Like, that's really simple, and I mean, yeah. So I just thought, like, okay, get a translator, get the parents involved so they know what's going on, because the kid has to go home and explain to his parents what happened, and they're like, what? You know? And then also the thing that really bothered me was that they just, like, they brought him in, so they just, like, took him into the principal's office, and they were like, are you in a gang? This happened, she said this, and the other parent of the other student who was accusing him said, like, this kid did this, and, like, I don't know. And they knew nothing about the student, and they didn't talk to the teacher. And the teacher should, like, know him well enough
That
to,
like happened this year too with the boy that made the
That reminded me.
the clock.
Yeah.
And like they didn't like tell parents or anything.
Yeah.
They just he got in so much
Yeah,
trouble.
oh my
and that's what I think about, like, the teacher, like, should know the student well enough to just automatically be like, no, I know my students. Like they wouldn't. Of course not.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the practicum when the kids were drawing the S's.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that was assumed to be gang related because they were Latino. Like
no, I think it's because I think I know what happened. One of our students who is just like, yeah, it means South Side. It means the South.
It's the
He's just saying that.
yeah, exactly.
Like he's making that his own thing because he knows, like, you know,
Yeah.
they were telling me about these songs that I know are like hardcore rap songs. And
Yeah.
so like I'm getting that. He's getting it probably from music and
Yeah.
probably from like the video games that they play that are violent. Like he's just saying that it's that, and then he's just relating it to this symbol.
Yeah.
And so then they decided that it was that, and
Oh my
they made it like their thing, which really in reality means nothing.
It doesn't mean
I looked it up.
anything.
It's like a clothing brand called like the Super Stussy.
Okay, and I thought about it. My friends and I drew that every
Oh, yeah.
single day on like every single sheet of paper we had in elementary school because it was a cool thing.
But I do get that if the students are like saying like, oh, this is related to a gang that they just made up in their head
But
for fun.
Yeah, but it's not
You
the
still
symbol
don't
that's the problem.
You don't encourage it, but it's
No.
like to, I don't know.
To make such a huge deal
Yeah.
about it, rather than talking to the student, just be like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
so like, why are you talking about this, or what do you think that this has to do with
But
what
she
we're
also
doing?
she had no idea what it was, and she just said, what is, like, she's like, can you tell me what this means? And they didn't, like, say anything probably
Yeah.
because it doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything.
And she's like, okay, so it means something bad. What does it mean? Tell me what it means. Like,
I feel
someone
like
tell
she
me what
was
it means.
pressuring them
Yeah.
to say something like
I
that.
was right there.
And that's like
I thought it was strange.
what emotion you're feeling. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh my gosh, but that was just
That
like
is-
a bad situation, and I feel like again it's with the like I feel like it's the assumptions that we're talking about, and like how when I drew that in school, nobody assumed that I was talking
Yeah.
about a gang or using a gang symbol because I'm a white kid.
Yeah.
Like I don't know anything about that stuff, so obviously they're just like innocent in all this. But
Yeah.
then you look at somebody who's like a person of color, and now you're gonna assume that
Like that's what I was just telling you yesterday
Yeah.
at Shuckson a couple years ago. If Latino students got in groups of like 2 or 3 or more, like they got in trouble all the time. They weren't allowed to gather in groups of like 2 or more if they were Latino. And that was just a couple years ago.
As like, did they act out, or this was just assumed?
This was the
before they
school like
did
being
anything
afraid.
wrong?
And because when I went and did my community assets map on Sterling Meadows, the person said a couple years ago at Shuckson, this is what happened, and this is why our students were so miserable. We were like, a couple of years ago, it's 2016.
I mean, I understand if there's like a group of students that like if they're together,
Yeah.
if they're in trouble, like that happens all the time.
It was just
In
if
every
you were
classroom,
Latino
yeah.
if you got in a group of like 2 or more.
That's ridiculous.
There was like 2 of us standing in the hallway, like, not okay.
That also makes me think of like, did you guys ever learn that I can't do it? That thing when you were like kids and you could learn how to spell blood.
Yeah.
That's
No.
something I would never
I
get
also
in trouble
think-
for. But
yeah. And I also think that us doing that, just like the students making like an S, maybe it does mean something. But we don't really know that,
As a
and we're
kid,
not
you don't
really
get
like
that.
relating it or doing
No.
anything harmful by expressing.
That's like how you couldn't wear bandanas to school
Yeah.
in elementary school. It's like literally, I just want to put this on my
yeah,
head.
it has nothing.
and have, like,
I mean,
people
I get,
French
I get
braids.
it, but it's like
yeah, we couldn't have them like red or white.
no, we can't. No,
Mm-hmm.
which it makes sense, but it's just.
But
making
also
it
at
sound
elementary,
so-
in like 2nd grade, like
Yeah.
really, I don't
It
know.
makes sense, but it's also super messed up.
Yeah,
It's
and
like,
it targets specific people.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so that's frustrating.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
think that
that's
whole
what that
concept is muddy.
Whoa.
But I had questions on mine. Okay, I'm sorry, I just want to jump into
No, it's all
C.
good. It's all good.
Okay, so I don't know if I was just reading it wrong or what, but it's talked about, it said the 5 love languages that are discussed, and it was like, how is the Cambodian love language different from what you may not experienced, and then blah, 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 and I didn't even get to like what I experienced because I was trying so hard to understand, because the guy said, there are 5 love languages, and he said, touch, act of service, word of affirmation, quality time, and gift, and he said that these were American love language. And then he said Cambodian love language, he said it does not include positive feedback, the comparison to others who are exceeding. And then I started just quoting him because I got confused.
Yeah.
And he said, you don't get hugs, but you'd get beat. He says, this love says, I love you, this is why I blame you all the time. I love you, this is why I compare you to another person. My love for you is not about the quality time I have with you, but about the money I make and bring home to you. I can tell you I love you because no matter what time you come home, there's food in the fridge. And I was so confused, and I was like, is he saying that this is the Cambodian love culture, or is he saying this is Cambodian love culture when it's Americanized, or I couldn't
that was
pick it apart. I was
super
confused.
confusing.
So, like, I struggled with even getting to, like, what my family was like, because I was like, wait, is this American, or is this actually the Cambodian love culture?
I'm wondering if they're just trying to point out that there are different love languages. Like, that's the main idea, is that, like, different cultures have different ways of expressing love for one another. And one of the ways that, I guess, it's saying that people in Cambodian cultures express that is by, like, supporting their families, like, providing for them. And there are different ways of, like, maybe in their culture, that's the way that they parent, is using, like, physical force or whatever. Like, that's part of it. I think that's a generalization too, like what you were saying, but also, like, it's just recognizing that the way that we perceive things in our culture is going to be different from how
And, like, hearing that and thinking, like, that's wrong.
Yeah.
But
Because that's what, like, automatically comes into my mind. I'm like, with all the child development classes I've had, like, you're not supposed to use violence to solve a problem. But the thing is, like, different cultures have different views on that, and that doesn't mean that, like, it's right to do that. It just means that in that culture, it's accepted, you know?
And it was just confusing because he seemed so distressed while talking.
Yeah.
But I don't read social cues very well, so he could have just been fine. Like, I don't know the guy. And so I guess, like, my overall question was, like, is this, like, because he was also one of the refugee people that come here, and so it's like, is this, like, what is he trying to say?
Yeah.
Like, I guess my whole muddy question is, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Why can I not
trying to
understand
put
you?
captions on, those were wrong.
I
Yeah.
know.
That was
I was
bad.
like, no, this is definitely not what this guy's saying. Like, no.
I never like use YouTube or like whatever that was on captions, but oh my gosh, these are horrible.
It was terrible.
So I guess if I had to, like, if you guys were interested in making your own muddy question, like,
Yeah, because I had a hard time with that too, because I was like, I don't
Like maybe
understand.
we could get some more
some more insight on that from somebody else.
somehow.
Help us, joy. What time?
48.
48. 00?
I would say a little bit earlier.
It's 2:48. Really?
Yep.
Did we start at 2?
I think so.
And then, on the dot. That's cool.
Do we want to just like go over my section?
Yeah, go
really
over
quickly,
it.
just
Yeah.
lastly?
Oh.
Do we word this?
Oh. How do you want to word it?
I guess just like when it comes to love languages, is it like in this particular video?
Yeah, were they
what's-
talking about
Yeah.
Their culture, like their home culture, or were they talking about like their like the Cambodian culture?
Okay, I can word that, and then let's touch on yours.
And then, so the last part of it was very, so it was like kind of broad. It was like how might you start to build bridges in your classroom that might include the aspect of a third culture as experienced by the people in the second video on third culture kids. Yeah, I know. I was like, oh man. Okay, so I just kind of like talked about how you can like express that as an experience. Like you put that out there for people who don't just have like one place that they identify as being home, you know, because like not everyone realizes like, oh, I was born here, I grew up here, like this is my home. But other people, like your boyfriend, have had many homes, and so they don't identify, like when someone asks them, oh, where are you from, or where is home, like they're not going to have a simple answer. And that's okay, because people experience home differently.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's just like what I would try to express. And also, like, I don't know, this sounds cheesy, but now I'm thinking, like, this is just a new idea off the top of my head, but also, like, making the classroom a place that they can identify as being home, in that, like, it's a place where they feel comfortable and where they feel like they can, like, express themselves and their, like, ideas and their upbringings without, like, having people pass judgment.
Or having the classroom be somewhere that they can identify as part of their
Yeah, exactly. Like, be included in
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
That's cool. Definitely. Classroom is a home.
It just reminded me of the idea of, like, multiculturalism.
Yeah.
And, like, being fluent in not just two cultures, but, like, multiple cultures. Like, and I feel like capitalizing on that and having that be, like, an asset instead of a deficit is, like, super important. So,
For sure.
yep.
I have to boogie to my class.
Woo! Well, we're good.
10 minutes.
All right.
Solid.
Sweet.
Okay, this is how I worded that question. I said, is this video or like is this section in regards to Cambodian love culture?